In this section of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table some marketing tech and apps that have caught our attention over the last week. So Pascal, hit me with your selections.
So, Roger, I hope you don't mind, but I'm going to continue with Chrome extensions. This is my theme now, and I'm sure eventually I'll move on from that. And they are both kind of choices based on recent experience. So, for our viewers and listeners, Roger and I obviously share the work when it comes to the pre-production, production, post-production of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. Roger will take care of the audio version of the series because he's been podcasting for a while now. Actually, I couldn't remember. When did you start podcasting, Roger? Do you remember?
My marketing and finance podcast was launched in 2014, but I actually did a podcast earlier than that. It was called Group Fitness Over Coffee, believe it or not. And I actually started that one in 2012. So, crikey, 8 years.
Right. And people will know video is my preferred format, so I take on the role of taking care of the YouTube and future channels. And what you can do on YouTube, as many of you will know, is put a thumbnail image to help you promote, obviously, that particular episode. There's an annoying thing about YouTube, which is that the file size is limited to 2 megabytes. So like many of you, I'll be using Canva, and this week I got a file which was 2.1 megabyte. And Roger, I thought, well, surely, and I thought wrong. So I was reminded of an app which is actually owned and was actually improved upon by Google called Squoosh. So think of it as a squash, but with double O, Squoosh. And what Squoosh would allow you to do was to actually compress an image without losing the quality of what it looks like for, obviously, us as visitors of the interweb. So what you can do is put an image that is maybe 10 megabytes, and by using a bit of a dial, you can reduce it to the 2 megabytes that YouTube requires. But you'll see that the loss in quality of your JPEG or PNG is actually much, much reduced if you use any other compressors. And the reason why Google invented it, improved upon it, was because they were getting fed up with people not compressing their images for websites. Why it's not part of the full Google Suite or Google Workspace, as we mentioned a moment ago, Roger, is a mystery. But Squoosh.app is a great addition to your Chrome bar and Chrome extension. But if you want something that goes beyond that, maybe you want to work on colors, you want to work on contrast, you want to work on sizing and shapes and so on, then I was reminded of something called Pixlr. So this is how I pronounce it, but it is spelled Pixlr. .com, and then you can obviously have the web version as well as the Chrome extension version. And this allows you to really manipulate your images, but they also have some predetermined templates using AI and actually using, in the early days, feedback from professional photographers. So if you have an image that is okay, it can look truly outstanding by using this feature, Pixlr. So Squoosh for swift and rapid work without losing quality, and Pixlr for more advanced form of photo editing.
Do you know, Pascal, you really made me laugh when you said that about YouTube thumbnails. Literally every time I publish a video on YouTube, I always upload the photograph and bang, it knocks me back with that error message. And it doesn't matter how many times, I always forget. And I always get really grumpy when that message comes up, because then I have to take the file, put it into, I actually just use Paint, which is the built-in program within Windows, to reduce the size of the file down a little bit. But Squoosh is going to be one of my best friends going forward.
And very quickly, I just don't understand the limit, Roger. I mean, even nowadays, a pretty poor, mediocre mobile phone will take an image that is more than 2 megabytes.
Yeah. And I agree, I don't understand the logic, because you could upload a 45-minute, 90-minute video in 4K, which must be hundreds of gigabytes in size, and yet they won't let you. They won't let you put a small photograph bigger than 2
just in
megs.
case you break YouTube somehow.
Absolutely. So shall I tell you about my tech?
Yes, please.
Okay. What I'm going to do this week is I've actually revisited a couple of apps that I've dismissed in the past. And recently I took another look at a presentation app called Prezi. Have you come across Prezi?
Yeah, I've not looked at it for such a long time, Roger.
No. Now, I'll preface this by saying, as you know, I'm not a massive fan of millions of slides when you're doing presentations. Most of my slides that I do use in presentations will tend to be a photograph and maybe one or two words. I've never been a heading bullet point, bullet point, bullet point, bullet point type of person. So I'm not Mr. Death by PowerPoint. And Prezi, it was just a different take on PowerPoint. Instead of slides going from 1 to 100 or whatever it might be, Prezi sort of builds them into a web, and you can move up to the top, you can move down to the bottom, you can zoom in on the center. And it looked interesting, but I never really saw it as anything other than a bit of a gimmick, to be perfectly honest. And maybe it was the fact that I didn't really use slides that much that I just dismissed Prezi. But of course, recently, since the pandemic, we're now doing more and more online events, and I'm being asked now to talk at more online events again. And if you do it over Zoom, one of the problems with PowerPoint is that unless you use their sort of green screen thing to superimpose the slides behind you, which can look a bit tacky, you've always got this problem where you've got the slides in one box and then you've got you in another box, and you maybe slide them to make you bigger or the slides bigger, and it just doesn't look very professional. But what Prezi have done is they've created an add-on to their service now. It's called Prezi Video, and literally what it does is it becomes the camera for when you're presenting on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever it is, and it superimposes the slide onto the screen as you're talking. So you could sort of move to the side like this, and then your presentation slide would appear in this corner, and it moves up and down and this, that, and the other, and you can make the transitions look quite good. And it just looks really, really professional. And yes, I still don't really like all that zooming in and zooming out, and I probably won't use that. But there's nothing else out there that I can see at the moment which allows you to effectively and very easily superimpose slides over you talking without it just looking rubbish. So Prezi has sort of sucked me in again just because they've offered this. Now, maybe Microsoft will come along and do something similar for PowerPoint, but at the moment, I'm pretty impressed with this. The second thing is Open Broadcaster Software, OBS. Now, I think on the show before, Pascal, we've talked about things like Restream and StreamYard, which allow you to broadcast yourself on video live to things like Facebook Live, LinkedIn Live, if you're lucky enough to have got LinkedIn Live, of course. Dig. And Restream's fine, but it comes at a cost. And depending upon how often you do it, it can be quite a significant cost, especially if you want to do it in HD. And OBS is free software. It's one of those sort of conglomerate type collaborative type software. That's what I meant, where people work on it, and therefore it's just free. Now, I tried OBS about a year, 2 years ago, and I just thought it was really complicated to use. The interface was clunky. I just genuinely didn't understand it, and I watched a few YouTube videos to try and educate myself, but I just found it clunky and I gave up, hence why I've used things like Restream. But there's been an update to OBS recently. It's on version 26 now, and they've done a lot of work to actually make it user-friendly. And I tried it out a couple of weeks ago, and I thought, you know what, this is actually quite easy to use. Maybe it's because I've become more au fait with using video software over the last 18 months, possibly. But I actually quite like it now, and obviously because it's free, you can still broadcast in HD, which you have to pay a premium for, usually on things like Restream and StreamYard. And if you download the OBS, you can stream to Facebook, LinkedIn, Periscope, Twitch, whatever it might be, gaming platforms in HD for free. So yeah, previously didn't like Prezi, previously didn't like OBS, but now they're back in the tin.
Yeah, well, that's excellent. I'm not surprised about OBS kind of making some improvement because there was a time, I would agree with you, there was almost this misplaced pride of being difficult to understand. And it was
Mm.
almost like you had to pay your dues. It was almost like some rite of passage where you had to watch hours and hours on YouTube to understand it. And I know that actually once you got past that, it was actually pretty straightforward. But the interface, was really, really not particularly welcoming. So I'm glad because I think we need more options, that we have currently, and from what I've heard, OBS is really, really quite powerful. And with Prezi, I suppose I very much like you. I took a good look. I really liked what they were doing, but I thought it was really limited in terms of its application. So in the case of a training course, you would not subject people to Prezi for a full day, but actually for a short address or a briefing session or even keynote, that could be interesting. But again, I love the way in which they are looking what's happening, and they're thinking, well, we have half the population on Zoom at this moment in time. What can we do to kind of plug things in? I mean, we know that Zoom have plans for the future as well, but I think it's great, and we should keep. You're right, and the lesson in this, Roger, is to keep our minds open to going back to some platform that we may have dismissed because at the time it wasn't quite right for us.
Absolutely right. So I'll be using Prezi in some new presentations soon.
So this is the marketing tech and app segment. Every week, Roger and I surprise each other with one or two tech solutions or even gadgets that can make life easier. So what have you got for us this week, Roger?
Okay, Pascal, earlier we were talking about Zoom and how in the future we're going to be able to charge for running events on Zoom. Funnily enough, my tech and apps this week are about events. Now, this week I was speaking at a conference. It was called the Social Media and Marketing Show, put together by #Events. I've done quite a few of their live events over the year, run by a really nice bloke called Andrew Charlton. So, hi, Andrew. And this was obviously totally online. And they used 2 different apps to run this event. And I thought it was really good. So I actually had a look into these apps. Now, they're not cheap, so you're probably not going to use these unless you're a bigger company and you want to put on fairly substantial events, talking hundreds and potentially thousands of people. But they are really interesting. And, Pascal, you were saying before that Zoom isn't that customizable. Well, these apps that I'm going to talk about are very customizable. So the majority of the conference was run on an app called Event with an extra E at the end, eventi.co. And effectively, it's almost like you put together your agenda, and each speech or each workshop can be streamed into the app on as a live video from somewhere like YouTube or a platform like Restream. And people effectively join the conference by logging on, so they get their own profile, and they can interact with the speaker. So the beauty of it is that I pre-recorded my talk, and they streamed it live, but I was actually in the session as it was being broadcast and talking to the people that were watching the talk. And I think that's quite interactive, and it's quite nice in the sort of world that we live in, because even though I wasn't physically doing it live at that moment, I was still there in person, able to interact. And then people can actually network in between talks simply by, they can see somebody who they like the profile, just like they would on LinkedIn, I guess, or any social media platform. And then they can have a video call, or they can do a messaging type call, all within the same app. And of course, it only lasts for the duration of the conference, and then it disappears. Now, there are options to allow you to keep the speeches there, etc., but the interactive bit will disappear at the end of the conference. And that's quite good, because sometimes on social media what you do is permanent and your interactions are permanent, whereas this is encapsulated within that particular event. So I thought it was a really nice platform, and it worked really well. The second one, and I have seen this before, is called AirMeet. airmeet.com. And what they did is they ran a end of conference networking session using this app. And the difference between this one and Eventi is that it's almost like a virtual conference area with split into tables. You know how you go to a conference and they have round tables with 10 people on each table? Well, this app is set up like that. And you effectively go in and you decide where to sit, just like you would if you go into a big, Upreneur summit. You decide, I'm going to sit over there with those 9 people, whatever it might be. And you actually sit on the table, and then all the people who are sat at that table, their little video images pop up just like they would perhaps in a Zoom call, but it's much more sort of themed to that environment. And you can discuss with the people on that table within the 10, or you can move to a different table, or you can engage one-to-one with that. And I just thought this is really quite successful in replicating the real-life networking that you do get at an in-life event in a virtual platform. Now, as I say, these are not cheap apps. You're not going to spend $15 a month to use these. You're talking hundreds, maybe thousands of pounds. But if that's what you're looking for, and you are a bigger company and you are looking to host something a little bit more sophisticated than Zoom, then I would check out Eventi and AirMeet.
Oh, thanks very much for that. I didn't know them. I knew others, but not those. And importantly, it reminds us about networking. I mean, ultimately, I think at this moment in time, most platforms focus on the speaker or the presenters, but we have to also look after the experience of the attendees, and networking. Yes. The ability to have a chat during the coffee breaks and so on is usually where actually most people meet the right contacts and connections. Bear in mind your earlier comments around cold emailing or cold calling, but also if you think about how you built your business and how you built your brand, is usually during those chats with others, not just listening politely to the presentations.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Roger, well, I'm going to continue, if you don't mind, with the Chrome extensions. I will exhaust them very soon. And just to be clear to our viewers and listeners, I'm not suggesting you should use all the extensions I'm mentioning. I'm just going through a bit of rediscovery of what I used to use, and hopefully making life a little easier for yourselves. So, you know that curation is important in content marketing. We do our fair share for the 2 Geeks, but also for the different video series and podcasts that we run. And we have different ways and means to do so, but sometimes you just want to work a bit faster. And there's an app called Panda, very much like the cuddly animal, although I'm told they're not so cuddly. You have to be very careful not approach them too quickly. But essentially, Panda will allow you to shortlist your go-to news websites and display the latest news articles in a way that is very easy to use, is very easy to scan, read, and only pick the articles you want to mention, for example, a news roundup, or even just to tweet about and so on. So it's very visual. It's very kind of interesting to look at, and it can be just a bit easier sometimes to use than, for example, Flipboard, which I have. I use Trello as well, and a few others. And in the spirit of Panda, it's about speed of execution. There's 2 versions, of course, as you would expect. There's the Google Chrome extension. There's also the web version. So feel free to experiment with both, but that could be very helpful for you. At the heart of it really is because curation is becoming an important activity for you. You could also delegate that by having a single account, and so on and so forth. So that's the number one option. Next is obviously, well, if you want to use a curation tool such as Panda and any others, you need to obviously find those news websites. And sometimes that can be a little tricky, although, yes, Google will be your friend. So there is something called SimilarWeb. Now, SimilarWeb started life actually as a tool for SEO, because it would analyze website rankings and traffic figures and give you some notions about, where the traffic came from. But they have also a feature free of charge, which allow you to find similar websites to your favorite website. So let's say, for argument, Roger, you found an amazing news website about the world of financial management and the likes. You could copy and paste the URL into their search function, and it will come up with a report showing similar website based on keywords and content themes. So that can also accelerate and help you save time in finding your go-to news website for curation. Again, You want to be seen to be well connected, well researched. You want to be able to quote different brands and different websites, and maybe sometimes not always go for the same brands everybody else. I mean, if you work, for example, in business, to always quote the same as everybody else can sometimes be seen as just a me too. Here you are in a position to actually surprise your audience with something very different. So Panda, as your way to curate, but to find the news website, I would recommend SimilarWeb.
I like the sound of that second one in particular, and I'll tell you why. And again, I'm a big fan of Flipboard and such like. But what I do find is that because they try so hard to find things that they think you'll like, that I think that they unintentionally create confirmation bias in a lot of people. It'll learn the articles you like. It may learn your particular political persuasion, and it'll give you articles which you will genuinely agree with. And I think one of the things we have to do as individuals all the time is seek out contrary views to what we feel, especially from a political point of view, I guess, at the moment. And I think that something that, like you've described there, which might open my eyes by giving me access to something else, which I might not have found had I just used those websites that I've been using for ages, which have effectively drawn a circle around the sort of stuff that I'm given access to.
No, I think you're right. And the other thing that I'm finding with Flipboard, I mean, I've been using it for years. I'm a huge fan. But now I find myself having to discount more articles than actually using them. There's something strange happening at the moment where either they try and share a bit too much, or like you said, it seems to be very, the same as what I've seen a day ago. It doesn't seem to change very often. Or quite simply, sometimes it's simply off topic. I found myself having to pass more than actually, oh, yes, I'd use that one. So that's what I've been looking at. And I think it's part of what we should do, all of us, is to kind of refresh your toolkit from time to time.
Definitely. In this section of the show, Pascal and I bring to the table a couple of apps or platforms or websites or pieces of tech, again, that have caught our attention over the previous week. Pascal, I always look forward to what you've got, so hit me with your marketing tech and apps for this week.
All right, Roger. So I'm going to wrap up my kind of quest for information knowledge around Chrome extensions. I may come back to it, but I want to kind of bring it to an end so I can move on to other themes. But those two were actually inspired by what happened to me the last couple of weeks in terms of working and the content creations. I'm going to begin with Vimeo Record. Now, Vimeo would be known to some as, some say, competitor to YouTube, but in fact, it's a very different platform where video producers and the likes can publish their work. And in fact, if you remember, Roger, I started using Vimeo really before I used YouTube. And Vimeo released and adapted to the demands of the time a Chrome extension whereby you can record your webcam and your screen and leave a message on Vimeo, your Vimeo account. So video messaging, whereby, for example, if I was to receive an article or a video for me to review with my editor, Tim, instead of sending a long email, I can literally just record myself talking through the video, frame by frame or step by step, and then he can watch the video on our Vimeo account privately and then make the corrections accordingly. So I know that there are other platforms out there, but I was very pleasantly surprised to get an email from Vimeo 2 days ago saying, we've done this for you because we understand that you're working more remotely. We want to help your team. Reading between the lines, I do think that people can use Vimeo Record as a Chrome extension without necessarily having a paid-for account, because like all platforms, Roger, you can have a free Vimeo account and then you go up the kind of the steps. So if you've not done any video messaging yet, but you want to try something really robust and safe, I think Vimeo Record could be a safe option for you. Next, I wanted to talk to you about, again, my work recently. You'll be pleased to know that after weeks and weeks of agony and kind of, procrastination, I finally finished my French web pages. So, because, I've been working on those for quite some time. And I've been helped with my brother who works in France with a copy and so on. And I was working obviously on my WordPress website. I had obviously draft version of the web pages, but then how do I show my brother what I've been up to without him having access to it? It was all a bit tricky. And then I remembered a Chrome extension called, quite simply, Save to Google Drive. So it's an icon that you'll have on your Chrome extension, and whichever web pages you're looking at, if you click Save on Google Drive, it's going to save a PNG file of the whole web page, not just the picture you can see on your laptop screen. So that allowed me to work much faster with my brother to say, right, I think I've put the content in French as you wrote it. Here's a screenshot of the web page, but in full, so you don't have to scroll or do several shots. What do you think? And he could then annotate, and give his comments on Google Drive. So save to Google Drive and Vimeo Record to help you work faster.
Fantastic. I mean, the Vimeo Record sounds a little bit like, I think there's something called Loom, isn't there?
Correct, that's the same. Yeah.
And Vidyard as well. And all of these things have paid versions and free versions. And it's good to know that Vimeo, I mean, they've got a strong history of video in production. So I'll definitely be checking out Vimeo Record. Now, Pascal, a little bit of an apology, because I'm going to talk about something that I've already spoken about in an earlier episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. But I had to bring this back to the table today because this is massive. I'm just so excited about this. I talked about, it was way back, it was in the second or third episode of Two Geeks and a Marketing Podcast. I talked about the Apple Clips app. Now, the Apple Clips app it just allows you to make video, but the fabulous thing about Apple Clips is that it's got a built-in subtitling function, and it is so accurate. You literally film your video, and as you're speaking, the subtitles appear on the screen, and you can change the size of the subtitles and the font and all of that sort of thing. And yes, it does make the odd mistake. Even with my accent, it gets it mainly right, but you can still go in and change it and correct any typos and everything like that. But the one massive problem with Apple Clips is that the video was square. There was no portrait mode and there was no landscape mode. And I remember saying on the show when I reviewed it last time that if they ever introduce landscape and portrait, this will be literally hard to beat as your go-to video app for social media. If you just want to record a quick video and put it on social media with subtitles, this would be the go-to app. But of course, it's been square for about the last 5 years. Now, last night, Pascal, the little thing comes up on my phone, update app, and I see that there's an update for Clips. And you know where I'm going to go with this, don't you? We now have it, portrait mode and landscape mode in the Apple Clips app, plus a complete revamp of the interface, lots of new special effects, stickers. If you've got an iPhone 11 or an iPhone 10 onwards, you can even superimpose the animal emoji over your head and look like a cat or something if you so desire. But seriously, the subtitle feature of Apple Clips is just astonishing. And now that we can do portrait and landscape mode, I honestly go back to what I said before. It will be the go-to app for creating video for social media. It's absolutely fantastic.
Well, to our podcast listeners, if you could just imagine the grin and smile on Roger's face, which actually makes me even more jealous because I'm an Android phone user, and we just don't have something nowhere near as good as Apple Clips. And now that you do portrait and landscape, well, yeah, to be honest with you, that could be good enough for me to move to an iPhone.
I mean, I've been saying it for at least the last 2 or 3 years that I wish they would move on from just being square. But great app. So the second thing I want to talk to you about is, again, it's something that I've gone back to have a look at again after previously sort of dismissing it. And it's an app, it's a website, and it's called If TTT. It just looks like a jumble of letters. If TTT actually stands for if this, then that. And it's grown over the years. Initially, it would allow you to create sort of rules. So if somebody's subscribed to you on YouTube, you could send yourself an email, or you could send somebody an email, and that's what if this, then that means. You actually say, if something happens in one app, I can make it something else happen in another app. And it was all right. I used to play around with it. If somebody followed me on Twitter, you could get it to send them a thank you message. Now, some people would argue that that's quite intrusive, but it was that sort of thing. And after you've played around with it for a little while, well, I just sort of moved on. But I have gone back to it recently now, and it can literally do everything. It's got the ability to go into Alexa and all of those sort of apps and platforms. It can still do all the stuff on Twitter and YouTube. If people follow you, it can send you messages. But it could even, if somebody subscribed to me on YouTube, it could get my lights to turn on in the fridge. I mean, it's as ridiculously flexible as that. So it's literally a way of saying if something happens in one app or one platform over here, then it can make something else happen somewhere else. And once you get your head around that and start thinking about the implications, it does become quite powerful. And I think it's probably worth having another look at now, because it's really integrated into so much more stuff than it was when I first looked at it many years ago.
Thank you so much for that reminder, because you're right. I kind of was a bit dismissive in the early days because it felt like hard work. Yes. But actually, listening to you, Roger, I think all of us should kind of say, listen, we've got enough going on in our lives that is super fast and productive. Why don't put a bit of effort into something that could be very powerful? So yes, for our, for those long winter days, why don't we all learn about FTTT?
Fantastic. So again, some great apps to have a look at and to reconsider.